begin here shortly. And we're very happy to have you with us as we introduce Smart Home America to South Florida, and to all of you to share what the Fortified program is about and how our group of developers in our community can participate in it. And therefore, what we think could happen is this could have an overall impact on insurance premiums as this kind of practice spreads throughout the state. So we'll just give it a couple more minutes and then we'll kick it off. We've got some nice attendance here, so it's great to see everybody. And I guess Mary and Julie, are we ready to get started? And I can just introduce the team and kick it over to you guys.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. So I'm sure some more people might trickle in, but great to see so many people here for this wonderful workshop. And we're grateful to IBHS, and I want to make sure I get this right, the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, as well as Smart Home America, for introducing and sharing education about the Fortified program, which is a process, a construction process that in other states has proven to reduce insurance costs, or property insurance costs, I should clarify. So we're delighted to have them with us and thank them for
to send us a new one before free.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to ask everybody to please mute your microphones. We will have a question and answer period, but just really quickly, I'm Annie Lord from Miami Homes for All, and I'm going to kick it on over to our friends at Smart Home America and IBHS to introduce themselves. But perhaps Mary, you could start us off and have the team from Smart Home America and IBHS introduce.
Absolutely. My name is Mary Ewer. I am the Director of Field Services for the Fortified team. Fortified is a resilience program that mitigates against wind-driven rain, and hail losses. So I work closely with the mitigation standard to implement it throughout the country. I have two colleagues, and I'm just going to introduce the two of them because they're going to be a little bit quieter. Two colleagues on that may answer some questions in the chat for you. Alex Carey is our market development manager with the Fortified team, and Manuela Ecoa is part of our public policy team. Both of them are with me at IBHS, and we are all very excited to be here. So thank you for having us.
Good morning. I am Julie Shayi-Woodard with Smart Home America. We are a 501c3 based out of Mobile, Alabama. We cover the nation in education and outreach and policy technical assistance around resilience and sustainability. And on the call with me, I have Candace Wheat, who is our technical outreach specialist. I have Graham Green, who is our director of communications. I have Brooke Truxmondo, who is our policy and planning specialist.
Okay.
Excellent. So we are going to do a presentation, and I'm going to share my screen, but Julie is actually going to start. We just have it all in one slide deck. So it should be coming up now.
Candace is going to start, Mary.
Okay, Candace is going to start. So whenever you are ready, Candace, you can just tell me next slide, or if you want to share your screen, go ahead.
Okay, here we go. We are Smart Home America, a 501c3 not-for-profit based in Mobile, Alabama. Next slide. Smart Home America.
Oh,
Oh, so Smart Home America, we came about back about 15 years ago. Before the term smart home was actually a big thing as it is now. So when people hear that, sometimes they get a bit confused. We at Smart Home, we want to make sure that your home or residence is resistant to the wind, rising water, fire, that it is adequately insured, and that it is resilient as far as the green of the home. Then and only then do we worry about the smart home of things. Next slide. The building blocks for a resilient community, without the foundation without a solid foundation for the building for your community, it causes issues in the long term. So what we're doing, we're looking at building the foundation first and then moving forward with it. Next slide, please. We are in existence to speak to anyone who is a stakeholder in the community, whether it be manufacturers, the building code officials, real estate agents, insurance agents, folks like yourself, anyone who has a vested interest in the community. We want to make sure that they have the knowledge to make sure their communities are built to survive. Next slide, please. In 2023, there were 25 separate billion-dollar weather events that occurred across the United States. What you see here is kind of a description, a pictorial of those events that occurred. You can see it's not just along the coast, but all across the United States. Next slide, please. Here is the 2024. We're looking at 27 separate billion-dollar weather events. You know, the folks there in Florida, you are well aware and have all experienced, I'm sure, quite a few hurricanes in your years of being in Florida, with 2 coming through in the last 4 or 5 months. Next slide, please. The Insurance Institute of Business and Home Safety, which Mary's going to speak a little bit more about, they are the science behind FORTIFIED. We take that science, we bring it to the communities and to folks like you to spread that knowledge. Next slide, please.
Mary, this is where I'm going to take over. We cannot do, that is not true. We can do our work without Smart Home America, but it does not have nearly the impact that it has with them. They really do a great job of taking the science that we do and the standards that are developed and getting it out to make an impact in the world. It doesn't do a whole lot of good to do science and keep it in our lab. What you are seeing here is our research center that is located outside of Charlotte. Here, we are also a nonprofit. We're fully funded by the Property and Casualty Insurance Company. And our mission is to find solutions to make homes and businesses more resilient. And so as part of that, we do a lot of science at this research center and come up with, we have 2 mitigation programs. We're talking about the FORTIFIED mitigation program today, which we really study 4 perils. We study wind, rain, hail, and wildfire. FORTIFIED covers the first 3, and then we have a separate mitigation standard for wildfire. So we're going to do a quick tour of the research center next. I never feel like the video is long enough, so the first thing I'm going to point out on this slide before we start the video is down here you see a bunch of roofs that are installed on our property. We have several roof aging farms throughout the country where we have fully instrumented roof systems that are exposed to real weather. We can monitor the weather at their locations. We are able to study how these roofs perform as they age and pull panels from them at set increments. So we can pull panels at 5 years, at 10 years, at 15 years, and we have them in multiple different climate zones. So as we go and look at our research center and you come in, those fans you're seeing, there are 105 of them. They are 6 foot tall each. That airplane hangar is capable of generating 130 miles an hour winds or a Category 3 hurricane. We conduct research in hail, looking at how to generate realistic hail in order to support the standards. We are the only known facility to test wildfire with the built environment. So it is really important to look at that. And of course, water entering a building can be a huge loss. Summarize what the expected sequence looks like. The first thing we're going to see is damage to the roof cover. That roof cover is going to come off, then wall cover, Then either roof sheathing or structure, those are interchangeable. And finally, total collapse. So we know now that that is a pretty predictable, it's pretty predictably how any building is going to fail from a high wind event. The wild card in there is if something goes through your large opening and creates a big opening in your house, it could change that order some. And so that's where we talk about the garage door damage amplifiers. So doing hurricane damage assessments, what we have learned is that newer roofs always do better. That's not terribly surprising. Homes built to newer codes did better. So that is really encouraging for you guys in Florida. Following Hurricane Ian, yes, it was catastrophic. Yes, there was a lot of damage, but the homes that were built to a well-enforced modern code really did a pretty good job. Anywhere that you have low slope roofs, those are vulnerable. Installation is really important. Installation is really important with any material. Low slope roofs are historically poorly installed or not installed in the way that they're recommended. So we see more issue there than we do in other places. Garage doors can act as damage amplifiers. And then we're going to talk quite a bit about sealed roof decks and how the use of a sealed roof deck can limit water intrusion. And in Florida, you guys are lucky. Sealed roof decks are already part of your code. They are not part of the code nationwide. So this is something that for my family in Nebraska, when they re-roof, they put a sealed roof deck on because even if they do lose their roof cover, they're able to keep that water out. So you will hear me, anyone who works for IBHS, say many, many times that mitigation always starts with the roof. And that is because up to 90% of post-cat claims include damage to the roof. So that is the spot that we are seeing the most losses. It's what we expect based on progression of damage. But how can we mitigate against that damage? How can we build the roof in a way that we're going to really, really minimize the damage? And the biggest thing we can do is that sealed roof deck. So several years ago, we did a test in our facility. This is a 1,300 square foot duplex that is built identically side by side, except one side has tape on the seams of the OSB plywood, one side does not. So if 60% of the 8 inches of rain an hour hitting this house is getting into the roof, that is 7 bathtubs full of rain in an hour. Taping those seams can keep 95% of that water out. This duplex is 1,300 square feet, single story, built very similarly to how things are built throughout the country. So on the side without tape on the seams, you can see water start coming in at all of the different seams, at light fixtures, at bath fans. I found my leak in my roof in my bath fan that this picture could basically be from that. So all of these penetrations allow water to come in. And once that water comes in, it's soaking everything, it's adding a lot of weight, and it's creating a lot of damage. So what it causes is really heavy insulation and a home that looks like this that a family is not going to go back to quickly. And if they have power and if they can dry it out, they may be able to go back somewhat quickly, like within a few months. But realistically, especially in Miami after a major hurricane, they may not have power. The mold may take over. This side that we just snuck past was the side with tape on the seams. It was so dry you could walk in and sit down on the couch and be completely dry. A family could remain in that side of the home. And the difference in construction there was about $500 worth of tape on the seams of the plywood or OSB. And following that, we had adjusters come in and take a look at the two sides of the property. And what we found is that the unsealed roof deck had a claim cost at the time. It was about, the sealed roof deck had a claim cost at the time of about $7,000. It's not adjusted money. But the unsealed side's claim was 3 times as much. So 3 times as much money it was spent because they chose not to put this tape on the seams. And that was the only difference on these two sides. So sealed roof deck it is already in the Florida building code, and it is a very critical part of the FORTIFIED program. We are going to jump now into the FORTIFIED program. And within the Fortified program, we have 3 different pathways or 3 different standards. We have the Fortified Home Standard, Fortified Commercial Standard, and Fortified Multifamily Standard. It is important to understand the distinctions between these. I am going to speak today mostly to the Fortified Multifamily Standard, which is homes that are structures that are built to be rented, that are apartment complexes. It could be townhomes that are built by a builder to be held and rented. Anything that is commercially insured is going to fall under either the commercial or multifamily program. The home program is single family homes, duplexes, townhomes that are bought and sold in the traditional manner. I live in Maryland now. My whole neighborhood is townhomes. We would fall under the Fortified Home program. I will also put the caveat on this that I talk mostly about the Fortified Home program. So I will try to stick to multifamily language, but if I say house, the technical requirements are very similar for the 3 programs. The process is a little bit different. I definitely have the multifamily and commercial process slides in here. But it is important to understand that the very first step, if you are pursuing a fortified designation, is to understand which program it's going to fall under, whether it's going to fall under Fortified Home, Fortified Commercial, or Fortified Multifamily. As we look at the Fortified Commercial and Multifamily programs, for an overview, there are, and this is for all 3 programs, there are 3 different levels: roof, silver, and gold. At the roof level, we're going to look at the roof cover. Is it installed the way the manufacturer says? Is it properly rated for the hazards that are going to exist? And then any roof mounted equipment, any PV panels, any HVAC systems, for me, I have a roof mounted deck. So a roof mounted deck would be part of the roof program. At the silver level, we're going to start looking at the building envelope, including walls, windows, and doors. We're going to look at those garage doors or large commercial doors, make sure they're properly rated. And then if you are fortified commercial, we're going to need electrical connections for backup power. So that is a big differentiation between the commercial and the multifamily program. If you are fortified and you're a grocery store that you aren't going to want to lose business continuity, that is different than if you are a set of apartments. Families can live without power. It's not ideal, but part of what we're trying to do is keep business operations going, continue to be able to recover from these events. At the gold level, we're going to start looking at structural load path items. We're looking at connections from the roof to the wall to the floor, the connections between floors. And if you are fortified commercial, here you need on-site backup power for those critical utilities. So before we dig into the details of fortified, and I did not give you guys the disclaimer that I am a structural engineer and I'm going to try to not be too technical, but bear with me because I'm going to be a little bit technical. I want to look at how does fortified compare to the Florida Building Code. I missed taking the home out of this slide, but fortified in general. So you guys all know that within Florida, you have some different regions. You have a windborne debris region and you have a high velocity hurricane zone. So the high velocity hurricane zone is already very similar to a fortified gold. The areas that are not in either a windborne debris region or a high velocity hurricane zone already have essentially all of the requirements of roof in them. So if we look at the different standards and how fortified and the Florida Building Code compare, those roof-related requirements are very similar. One of the changes is that our maximum nail spacing for the roof sheathing to the roof rafters is 4 inches on center. The maximum spacing per the building code is 6 inches on center. Now, engineers are always going to control what this spacing actually is. But for us, if an engineer says they could do 5, we would still require those nails to be at 4. And then one of the differences that may be surprising is that in Florida, the Florida Building Code actually allows fewer options for sealed roof deck than fortified does. So it's really important to understand both the code and fortified and make sure you are following whichever is more stringent as long as you're allowed to do that. We never want to override the code The example of sealed roof deck method that isn't allowed in Florida is a fully adhered membrane, which is essentially a big 3-foot wide sticker that you roll on over the roof sheathing. So we would not allow that in Florida because the code does not allow that in Florida. Other key differences for the programs is that we require exposure C for all components, which really comes into play with roof cover design pressure calculations. This is something your engineers are going to do. Within the building codes, there are different exposure categories, and they step up. A long time ago, there was an exposure category A. It has now gone away. Exposure category B is for typical suburban, households or areas. We don't ever use exposure category B. Exposure category C is for someplace where there's a little bit more pathway for wind. So whether that's on the edge of a lake, on the edge of a subdivision, on a golf course, someplace that there's a little bit more run up for wind. And then exposure D is oceanfront. So we would require exposure C as a minimum no matter what. Probably the single biggest difference between Fortified and the Florida Building Code that is a change that Fortified requires more is that we require opening protection in all areas in Florida, not just in the windborne debris region. So we would require at the silver level for all openings to be protected with a large missile D protection system. And then we require additional inspection and site-specific photographs of some of the material and installation. So we have a third-party system where we have a group of people called evaluators who go out and work with the builders and the designers to verify the key components and ensure that they are properly installed and actually gather site-specific documentation of these items. Looking at this in a table format, you can see that there are just not a significant number of differences. Most of them are on the two big ones. There really aren't, is impact rated in the windborne debris region. And then there are less options available for sealed roof deck in the high velocity hurricane zone. So I'm going to dig in now to the details of the 3 different levels of the Fortified program a little bit. Before I do that, are there any questions I need to answer before I move on to other stuff?
You're good, Mary. Nothing's come into the chat yet.
Wonderful. Thank you, Candace. So at Fortified Roof, we talk about this as sort of a 3-step process. We're going to nail it down, seal it up, and lock it in. And really here, what we're going to do, the first step is I talked about the nail pattern being slightly different for Fortified than it is for Florida as a minimum. By adding additional nails, you strengthen the capacity of that sheathing being held down to those trusses or rafters, and you reduce the risk of the roof sheathing being that step in the damage progression. Seal it up is the next step. That's the sealed roof deck. So there we're going to install an approved system. We have 4 different methods that can be used to seal the roof deck. That essentially what we're doing here is creating a secondary resistance to water, and that's what it's called in the Florida Building Code, is a secondary water barrier, that when your roof cover fails, because we're going to assume at some point it is going to fail, because let's be honest, homeowners are not great at replacing their roofs when they should. We want to keep the water out, because by keeping the water out, we're able to really reduce the losses and keep families in their homes, which is what's important. And then we require a little bit of different detailing at the edges of the roof. So in our studies, what we have learned and what science shows is that roof failures always start at the edges. So by having a slightly different detail around the edges and installing a drip edge or edge metal around the sides, you can really impact keeping that roof cover in place and making the whole roof work as a system. So for fortified commercial or multifamily, what this means at the roof level is that if you have a low slope roof cover, it needs to be a tested and approved system. We accept a lot of different systems, Florida product approvals, it can be FM approved. It can be ICCES approved, but we need a tested and approved system. And then our evaluators will verify that that system was installed as it was needed to be installed per the tested assembly. We require that edge flashing, and we will look at a video here in a second that will point out why we require that. There are some, if there are wood nailers, there are some requirements for how those are attached. For any steep slope roof coverings, they'd need to meet the site-specific design wind speed. So there we're just looking for the very specific, does this meet what's required of that steep slope roof cover? The sealed roof deck is required. The roof deck attachment, so that is where I'm talking about those nails, has a slightly increased safety factor. So for a commercial or multifamily project, what that means is as your engineer is designing, they're going to increase that safety factor a little bit. So instead of multiplying by 1.5, they might multiply by 2. And that all depends on what code version they're in and what the system is and how they're designing. But there is a slightly increased safety factor. And then for gutters, we also have an increased safety factor and a evaluation of how they're installed. We don't just look at the roof system for roof. We also look at equipment, roof-mounted equipment. So if you have an HVAC system, it needs to be properly connected to structural framing. I'm going to use Nebraska as the bad example. I love Nebraska. Their building code enforcement is just not great. You could literally put an HVAC panel on the roof in Nebraska and hold it down with CMU blocks at every corner, and that would be okay. For Fortified, that would not be okay. In Florida, you're going to have more enforcement than they do in Nebraska, but still just the extra verification that the design was done correctly and that it's connected to structural framing makes a big impact.
Mary, there's a question about solar cells on the roof.
Yes.
What happens when you have those, and do gutters help?
Okay, so I'm going to do gutters first. So gutters they do not help. They also do not hurt when properly installed, but it is possible that gutters, especially if they're installed after a building is complete, could be installed in a way that damages the system of the roof. So gutters can be done. They don't necessarily hurt or help. Just like everything, they need to be installed properly. Solar photovoltaics can very much so be done. They need to be properly designed in accordance with one of the accepted standards, which is the ASCE 7, which is the Structural Engineers Bible. It shows you how to calculate loads for everything. The Structural Engineers Association of California has a document on designing solar panels, or you could do a wind tunnel study. We have never actually seen that happen, but we do allow for it. So with solar panels, what we're going to be looking for is, are they properly designed? Are the connections properly designed? And then were they installed as designed? But they can be done. Any skylights put a risk to the roof. So at the roof level, we're really looking at anything that is on the roof that could impact how your roof performs, has the potential to impact your designation. So we're going to want to understand what that looks like, including lightning protection systems. And here is why. This is a demonstration of 2 commercial structures. Low slope roof installed per the Fortified standard on the green side, and as we typically see in the field on the yellow side. You can see in the yellow that it's starting to come up. You can see the importance of that edge metal. You can also see that garage door, that overhead door, starting to fail on the yellow side. Preventing that failure, you will know when the door actually fails. I think that's in this video, but it prevents the roof from peeling off. And once that roof starts going, you're going to be in trouble. You start to lose other things. So by following slightly above code standards, and in Florida, very slightly above code standards, you're able to really mitigate against a lot of damage. And it is less dramatic than I thought it was, but you can see when the openings start to fail, because that is why this roof starts to crack along here. What happens when an opening fails is that the wind gets inside the building. It's actually this window that fails, not the garage door in this case. The wind gets inside the building and it basically blows it up like a balloon. So let me find where it happens. Here you can see the window is solid. If you watch, the window breaks, the roof starts cracking, the walls start falling. So that is what we're trying to prevent at multiple levels. But even this roof cover failure is going to lead to a lot more loss than this side. The window failure is really what we're going to be talking about at the silver level. So at the silver level, we start looking at windows and doors, we start looking at exterior walls, and we start looking at gable end bracing. We need here all windows, doors, and walls to be large missile impact rated for the entire state of Florida. We need any parapets or false fronts to be properly braced. We need all electrical and mechanical equipment to be elevated above the 500-year flood level. So we want to keep those things and the structure safe if it does flood. And then again, at the commercial level, we need connections for backup power. That does not exist for multifamily, but it does for commercial. And this video will explain more what I meant about the house sort of blowing up like a balloon. So here you'll see that this is on a home, but the concept is the same. As this garage door starts to fail, it really leads to those roofs and walls failing. And the frequency that we see this in the field is intense. Once you have lost a garage door, you are significantly more likely to have structural damage to the roof or one of the walls of the garage. So by just making sure that those doors and windows are properly rated, especially your large openings are properly design pressure rated, it's going to have a huge impact. You guys have a giant advantage here because you are already doing this. Most of your doors and windows are properly rated. The biggest thing that Fortified is going to do differently than what's in the code is we are going to do that additional verification step of looking at what was actually delivered on site. Does it match what was ordered? Does it just an extra set of eyes to make sure that everything comes into place? And then when we go to the Fortified Gold level, we're really looking at a continuous load path. For anyone in Florida, especially for new construction, to do Fortified Silver and not Fortified Gold is ridiculous. I mean, it is just silly because you guys have engineers on every single structure anyway. So your engineer is already in Florida required to and designing you a continuous load path, looking at how all of those loads get into the building, get through the building, and get out through the ground. They also are doing that for any attached structures, any big canopies, anything, big drive-through areas of a bank. We're going to look at that. For Fortified Gold in a commercial, the thing that you may not already be doing, and this is, again, commercial, not multifamily, is backup power. So for a commercial structure, a grocery store, a bank, something that business operations is critical, you will need to have backup power on site. I got ahead of myself a little bit, but that is really what's happening at the Fortified Gold level. And what we're trying to prevent are failures like this. So here you see that whole roof come off and fly out. And that, like I said this earlier, it seems dramatic, and I've seen it happen. In this case, this was a great example of our researchers getting to play. This house had been tested several times, and they said, what would happen if we just disconnected all of the roof to wall anchors? And this is what happened. And I can promise if they had known they could get it to fly that straight out the door and get a video that could get us this much use, they would have done it way earlier. But unfortunately, we do see this failure at wind speeds that it shouldn't happen throughout the country. So I've talked some about verification, and really within verification for the commercial and multifamily programs, there are 3 pretty simple steps. The first thing is you're going to, as early as you can in the project, submit a multifamily or commercial eligibility application for each building. So if you have a site that has a bunch of buildings on it, you do have to submit for each building. That application will go through our team, who will help make sure that your design team understands the requirements. So the number one thing we see come up here is if somebody submits really late, especially somebody in the middle of the country, may have designed everything to exposure category B. That requires a lot of redesign to get it to exposure category C. So the earlier you can get an application in, the better. Once our team has looked at your application and figured out that we think it's going to make sense, we will connect you to an authorized multifamily evaluator who will work directly with the design and constructions team to document and verify that compliance during construction. Once the evaluation is done, the structure is complete, IBHS will issue the fortified multifamily certificate. The main keys to being successful, and again, this evaluation and compliance part is going to be the single biggest hurdle in Florida because your code is already so close. So some of the key factors, I already said it, but you cannot say it too many times. The faster you can engage IBHS and the evaluator, the earlier in the process, the better you're going to be. Making sure Fortified is written into bid documents so that people know that it's there. Reaching out to us and to Candace to help educate contractors, especially roofing contractors, on what's going to be required is going to be important. This says PV units attached to roof in hurricane-prone regions are acceptable but not recommended. And that's just because it can be complex to get all of the verification there. I think you guys are going to have less issue with it than somebody in Houston who does not have a well-enforced code is going to have with it.
Mary, I'd like to interject here with a question because it goes along with what you're saying about the building codes. A question came in: how often does Florida update their building codes? I'll let you start with that one.
So Florida update everybody, not everybody, about every 3 years. So a new code came out for Florida in January of 2024. The Florida building code process is back underway now. So there will be an additional new code that comes out about the beginning of 2027. So about every 3 years, the code gets updated.
It's also asked how IBHS, if it ever influenced revisions of the state codes.
We do have team members who sit on several of the Florida building code councils and groups. Anyone, literally anyone, can submit a code proposal to get it looked at. My 10-year-old niece could submit a code proposal that every building should look like a unicorn. It's never going to get anywhere, but she could. Part of the reason that the sealed roof deck is in the Florida code is because of IBHS science and because of our involvement in the Florida building code process and the model building code process. So yes, we do very heavily participate in the code development process.
The last piece of it was he asked, apart from Florida, which state has the second strongest codes?
I do not know that answer off the top of my head. I would have to get back to you. You do based on rating the states, Manuela?
Yes.
Go ahead.
It's Virginia, actually. Virginia is tied with Florida this year.
Awesome. Thank you. And some of that goes to enforcement. It can make a huge difference. For example, Louisiana has an updated modern code. They have better enforcement than they used to have. They don't have great enforcement. So it really, that is a hard thing to rate. We do have a rating the states document that you can look up on our website, but it isn't as quantifiable as it seems all the time.
Mary, to go along with the certification of the building, the question was asked: what's the turnaround time to evaluate and issue the certificate?
Okay, so that is going to vary. The evaluators are going to work throughout the construction process. They can typically turn them around pretty quickly because they are going to be involved as you're moving forward. So they're going to work with you and be able to fix changes as things come up. Once it gets to us that the evaluator has everything together, for commercial and multifamily, our evaluators are global risk engineers. So the turnaround time is a lot quicker. Once they say, yes, we've looked at all this, we think it's good, it doesn't take, it's Our team is small, so I hate to give you an actual timeline, but less than a month to turn it around once the evaluator has it to us. And they should get it to us quickly after they have the certificate of occupancy.
That clears the questions at the moment, Mary.
Perfect, thank you. Another really important critical item for success in any fortified program is that understanding and communicating with people that any changes or additions to the building could void compliance with the standard. So while PV is challenging, you are better off to do PV at the time of construction than to get a fortified certificate, add PV, and then come back and try to renew your fortified certificate. Because while that can happen, you just have to involve the evaluator at any time. And we do reserve the right to remove a designation for any additions, whether that's, solar systems or a big new HVAC system on the roof. Changes to doors and windows. If you change out an overhead door and don't document it, it can void that designation. So looking at what these cost, I'm going to skip this home slide, but for fortified and multifamily, the fees are going to vary a little bit. The earlier you get an evaluator involved and the faster and more complete the documentation is that you provide can lead to a shorter review time. These evaluators charge about $220 an hour for 1 to 3 buildings to get a fortified gold evaluation, which is what the majority of fortified commercial and multifamily designations are. You're looking at about $3,600. And in this, of course, we use approved engineering firms for evaluators. So the key first step is submitting an application and being connected with an evaluator. Looking at the fortified program summary, for the fortified home program, we currently have over 70,000 designations nationwide in 31 states. Alabama is leading with over 50,000 designations. The fortified multifamily and commercial programs are a lot newer. We started as the fortified home program and added commercial 5-ish years ago and multifamily about 3 years ago. We currently have about 250 commercial and multifamily designations nationwide. And remember, these are buildings, so that's way more than 250 families, but 250 buildings have been designated. Louisiana is leading the designations for fortified multifamily. They have close to 200 of them because it is written into some of their guidelines. Fortified multifamily is mostly gold designations, and they exist in 7 states so far. So that is a summary of, you can see the growth of the program. We are continuing to grow at that rate. We hit 50,000 designations in 2023 and exceeded 70 last year. So we're growing. We designated about 18,000 houses last year, which feels crazy, but we did it, and it's a great accomplishment, and we're putting a lot of families in safe houses. And I'm going to let Candace or Julie talk a little bit about some of the results that we've seen.
So Hurricane Ida came through in 2021 through Lockport, Louisiana. You can see on the screen there, the different colors is going to indicate the strength of the winds that came through those areas. Next slide, please. You're looking at an overhead view, and you can see the destruction and the damage there in Lockport, all the debris that is surrounding those homes. It just devastated Lockport. Next slide, please. So what you're looking at here is a facility that was, or buildings that were in the process of being built. They were about 3 weeks away from completion at the time that Ida hit in 2021. Next slide. The building on the left, these two, and this is an up close of the complex that you saw just a moment ago on the right that was in the process of being built. The building on the left, these two were less than a mile away from each other. So, they were getting the same winds were hitting both of these structures. The one on the left is obviously not inhabitable, and it's workforce housing that you're seeing there. The folks that were living in there obviously could not come back to that structure and live in it at the shape it was in. The folks who built the one on the left also built that the buildings on the right. When all was said and done, the building on the complex on the right was delayed by about 3 weeks from opening. You'll notice that there is an air conditioner unit that's kind of in the center of the screen there. That's because they hadn't gotten to the point where they had secured it yet. But a lot of the folks that were living in the apartment complex on the left were able to move into the homes that were on the right. And again, they were only delayed by about 3 weeks to being able to open that. So of course, if the people who were living in the left had been on the in the complex on the right at the time Ida hit, they would have been able to come back to their homes pretty quickly. They would have been able to live. They may not have had power, they may not have had water, but they would have had a place to live, and their belongings would have been safe as well. Next slide. So this one is dealing with the tornadoes and narrowing the path. You know, wind is wind, regardless of whether it's coming off of a hurricane or a tornado. We can't eliminate all of the damage that happens with a tornado when it comes through, but what Fortified looks at doing is reducing the damage on the outskirts of it, where you're looking at that the yellow, the green, and the blue. A lot of the damage that's done is addressed through the Fortified program, and making sure that you know, some of that is taken care of with addressing the roof, addressing the continuous load paths of the homes. Things like the rafter ties, the stronger garage doors that Mary's been talking about, reinforcing that roof, they can help to help that home better withstand up to 130-mile-an-hour winds. Narrowing the path is one of those things that when we address them, it allows us to protect those homes better. Next slide, please. So the modeled impact for the fortified roof and the multifamily, you're looking at decreasing the average annual loss by 38% at a severity of decreasing by 41%. Next slide. The University of Alabama did a study on the return on investment for resilient construction. And what they found was that the return on investment can be as high as 72% when fortified standards are implemented. Next slide. Well, and it also showed that 74% of renters would pay more money for a resilient home. You know, if they knew that they had a better chance of having somewhere to come back to after the event, they were willing to pay up to 74% of the renters were willing to pay more. Next slide, please. So the National Standard for Resilient Construction is recognized by all of the organizations that you see here on the screen. It's not just something that is new to the world that we live in. Next slide. We also have developed a resilient housing planning guide. What it does is for communities who do not necessarily have planners, it's a step-by-step to help them recognize and see where their vulnerabilities are and how those vulnerabilities can be addressed pre-disaster. Research shows that for every dollar that is spent in mitigation prior to an event, $13 is saved in the long run. So when you think $1 to $13, it doesn't sound like a whole lot, but when you start talking 1 million to 13 million, that's a pretty big, pretty significant difference there. Next slide. And that is the last slide of the piece here with our website for Smart Home America, as well as my contact information. The phone number that you see on the screen is a direct number to me, as well as my email address. I am happy to answer any questions that you have. And if I do not know the answer, I'm happy to reach out to Manuela, Alex, Mary, and get those answers for you. I see we've had a couple of questions come into the chat. Mary, I don't know if you have been reading them as they went, but I'll be more than happy to get them to you at this point.
I have not. We have a pretty significant amount of time for Q&A, so I was trying to not get pulled all out of the slide deck and lose my ability to advance slides.
Absolutely. While strengthening homes and commercial buildings is good, how would we be able to get benefit from the insurance? We'll start there, and I'll continue on as we move.
So more and more insurance companies are recognizing Fortified. We are a nonprofit funded by the property and casualty insurance companies. For multifamily and commercial structures, the way that insurance is written, it is much easier to see the insurance benefits, but we are seeing more of them in the home range as well. In some states, you can get discounts of, we'll use Alabama as our example again, because that is where we have the most inventory. For a fortified gold home, you can get about a 50% discount on your wind premium that does not degrade. So you get that discount that stays with your home as long as you renew your designation every 5 years.
Max asked, how do you become a evaluator for IBHS? Graham, if you are still with us, would you drop that link for their website into the chat? But I'll let Mary speak to it.
So I want to talk about that there are two separate groups. For Fortified Home, our evaluators, we do have a network of evaluators. If you have residential construction experience, you can apply to be a Fortified Home evaluator. For Fortified Multifamily and Commercial, our evaluators are national risk engineering firms. They are invited by our commercial and multifamily team to be evaluators. That does not mean don't reach out if you are from one of those groups. We would be interested in talking with you. But it's a lot easier to become a Fortified Home evaluator than a Fortified Multifamily evaluator.
The question was posed, does the Fortified Home program work in areas that have tornadoes?
Absolutely. Candace showed the narrow the path video there at the end. You can you can build a house that will not have damage from a direct hit from an EF4 or EF5. That house is going to have no windows. It is not going to be pretty. It is not going to be cost effective. What we can do is cost effectively mitigate damage from a significant portion of the damage that happens in any storm. And more than 96% of tornadoes are EF2 or less, which is like 140 miles an hour or less. You guys live in Florida, you are already designing for 140 mile an hour winds in a lot of spaces. So always listen to your warnings. Please go to a shelter or a basement, but we can mitigate a lot of that damage in tornado areas and have a big impact on the recovery of a community.
Alexander, yes, we do have legislation here in the state of Alabama, and we are happy to share with the right individuals to help to get that going in your state as well. Graham dropped in the fortifiedwise.com website link for anyone who's interested in becoming a fortified evaluator. Did I miss any questions as I was reading through? I had to jump back up after speaking, so I may have. I believe that is all of the questions in the chat.
We do have a lot of time for back and forth questions. So if we didn't clearly answer, we specifically left time for Q&A so that we can answer any questions that's brought up, because it tends to bring up a lot of them.
Would you all be willing to take live questions with folks raising their hands?
Absolutely.
Great. If you have a question, folks, just raise your hand and someone will call on you.
Or if we didn't fully answer your question in writing, let's talk about it and figure it out.
To kind of speak to the question about the legislation in Alabama, if you are an admitted carrier, then you have to submit what the discount is for the home. You know, in Alabama, anywhere up to 55% off of the wind piece of your home can be discounted from with a fortified gold designation on your home.
And I do see we have a question from Beatrice.
Yeah, that this works with passive homes?
It does. Yeah. So the question is, does this work with passive house? Yes, Fortified can be used in conjunction with several different energy efficiency standards, including passive house. So you can build a passive house and a fortified gold house. Of course, as you layer things, you just have to figure out how the requirements play with each other, but they work really well. It's just making sure that you aren't creating unintended consequences by complying with multiple standards. You guys are much quieter than I expected.
Well, I just want to say, and feel free, folks, as you come up with more questions, we'll leave the room open for a few more minutes. But thank you so much, Mary, and the whole team from IBHS and Smart Home America. So grateful to have you here. And again, to recap, the context here is obviously we're dealing with an incredibly unusual and exorbitant property insurance market in our state. And this is one small step forward that we wanted to take to foster systems that keep those property insurance rates as low as possible. So in particular, I think what we found so exciting about Fortified is the system with its accountability really did seem to fill a gap for us here in Florida, where we have great code, but we don't have great accountability, and that could be one of the reasons why the assessment of our risk here is so very costly. So, yeah, Mary, did you want to comment on
Yeah,
that?
I think to just add a little bit to that. So if you think about, we are fully funded by the property and casualty insurance company. So the Fortified program is a program that has been created by the science that our members, insurance companies, have funded and back, which is part of why they are willing to support it, because they understand the documentation process really well. The other key aspect to it that I didn't talk a ton about, but I did reference, is that a fortified designation on any structure is good for 5 years. At the end of that 5-year period, there's a redesignation process. So really what we're looking for there are those changes to the structure. So an evaluator goes back out, takes pictures of the structure, makes sure the roof is in good condition. There's an anticipated 5 more years of life for it. Make sure that nobody has added solar panels and not told us, or has added a wing to the structure and not told us. And you would be shocked at how often that happens. But by having that redesignation process, it really helps insurance companies understand the risk that they're taking on, which helps them be able to offer a lower rate. Because for a structure, even knowing what building code it was built to, they don't know 10 years down the road what may have happened to it. Where with that redesignation process and the fact that it is science that has been backed and designed by them, they're able to have a little bit more confidence in that risk.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Candace.
I just wanted to say I dropped my contact information into the chat just in case someone wanted it and did not have the opportunity to get it off the slide. It's there.
Great. I see a question from Sandy, and then we'll go to back to Beatrice.
Yes. My question was related to, you talked about the importance of the seal. You talked about the importance of, with the roofing system, of the drip edge, which I'm a big believer in from before. But one thing that I didn't hear about, and perhaps it was just, you just thought it was in there, is waterproofing. So, so for a long time in commercial application, waterproofing of openings has been a big part of the system of what you put in place, but not so much in smaller commercial like multifamilies, and certainly not in residential. It's only more recently that it's become used. Is that something that the Fortified system takes into account? Is it something that we should consider as part of the package?
So Fortified does not currently talk about flashing or waterproofing of openings. We say that they must be installed per manufacturer recommendations. We have worked really hard to have a system that balances mitigating the risk with mitigate and being usable. So Fortified, when it very first started as a home program, was called Fortified for Safer Living. It was new construction only. It was all hazard. It is very expensive to build. And every evaluation that comes in takes me personally between 2 and 6 hours to review. So the quantity of homes and families we were able to impact meant that it just didn't have the impact we wanted. And when we looked at that progression of loss, it wasn't a good use of time. That isn't to say it isn't important. And especially as homes are getting more airtight and air sealing is getting better, it is very important to have properly flashed windows. It's just outside of the scope of Fortified.
Thank you.
Beatrice, is your hand up from before, or do you have another question?
No, I have another question. How much the recertification every 5 years cost?
I don't know the multifamily numbers on that. It's going to be relatively minimal. They are, for a fortified home, you're looking at around $150 to $300. It's going to depend some on where you're located and where how far an evaluator has to travel, which we are getting more evaluators all the time. Being in Florida, our national partners have people everywhere for you guys. But it is significantly lower. And we have homeowners and building owners for commercial and multifamily that see the value in doing it every 5 years. It's going to be probably less than $500 for any building.
Okay.
Great. And I just want to take this opportunity to also thank the donors that have helped make this event possible. Of course, in addition to the real labor of IBHS and Smart Home America, thank you so much to Miami Homes for All Keyholders, who are our major donors that have made this possible. And scrolling through, I do see Katrina Wright from Bank United, one of our Keyholders. Please forgive me, anyone else, but feel free to pop it in the chat. But we're delighted to have your support so that we can, as we encounter the opportunities to share important information, we can do so thanks to major donors like Bank United.
And Annie, I just wanted to, can I jump in real quick?
Please,
Because I had to step away. Mary, will you share screen and pull up the side by side for Lockport?
Yes. Give me
So,
one.
while Mary's doing that, I see that we have Federal Home Loan Bank Atlanta on, and I just wanted to go back to that Lockport property. A lot of times we call that our mic drop. That was the first multifamily affordable housing, many layers of the capital stack to create that property. But it was the first one in the nation to meet that commercial home, that commercial multifamily, so that IBHS fortified commercial multifamily. And the more important part about that is that Federal Home Loan Bank Dallas was part of that capital stack. Second, because of the success of that property, because it went through the eye of a Cat 4, which everybody in the hurricane zone, especially Florida, knows that eye wall is the scariest part of it, the hurricane. Because it was designated gold, when Ida left, they had quotes from two prospects. And when I say quotes, right, a brokerage house was able to put what the insurers call a mud map, which is that back end of what that insurance diagram looks like. And for you that are on here that are in that development world, you know the crisis that you're in, but you know that also you went from maybe having 3 years ago 17 lines of insurance covering that total value of that property. You probably have 52, if not more now. It's much harder, right, to piece all those together to get that coverage in. After Ida left, it passed through. So they had two basically packages for that property. One was 100% increase in the original quote that they had to cover that property. Another was a 20% increase. So they locked into the 20%. After Ida passed, they were dropped. The only way they secured coverage on that property was because they had that fortified letter of compliance that it had met that highest level of sustainability. Louisiana now leads the nation in this type of development. They have over 60 properties coming online completely in the affordable housing realm with combinations of LIHTC and part of their QAP. So Louisiana took one step further because of the success they saw after Ida, and their QAP and their CDBG and their CBGDR all have fortified in there. But the other part of that was Federal Home Loan Bank Dallas decided, because of the success that they saw with their layer in that capital stack, that that just made sense. And so over the last 24 months, they developed and piloted and subsequently have relaunched within their affordable housing dollars points for affordable housing developers to go for gold or silver. They have a minimum that they need to meet roof. They've also created a grant program, and I know you've probably heard about this if you haven't actually had it presented to you at Federal Home Loan Bank meetings. But I encourage you to reach out to Greg Hedrick at Dallas and get an understanding of how they walked that road. The Southeast region, and y'all all know this, is the highest high risk area outside of the wildfires in the West and Northwest. But the amount of need for other lines of financing to get those low to moderate homeowners to a state of resilience is, I feel, at a level of desperation in the Southeast. And I think Federal Home Loan Bank Atlanta could make an amazing difference in that. So I just wanted to point out the significance of that Lockport success story and the path it opened for Federal Home Loan Bank Dallas to do something different and out of the box. And it has worked very well for them. And they continue to roll that out now every year. Smart Home was a technical advisor for them to help them get that through that. They worked closely with IBHS and Smart Home, and we supported them and their member banks in rolling that program out and how to utilize it and how to help their nonprofits that access those member bank fundings to get to those low to moderate households. So I just wanted to throw that in there because, yeah, I think it would make a huge difference, especially in the Florida market.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Julie. All right. Well, if there are no further questions, I think we can.
Liz has her hand up again.
I have a question. As I see, it's an analysis of the house built and all that sort of thing. But what it called my attention on the last video that we saw was Julie. There is no trees around that house. Now, we know what is the importance of trees. Now, how does a tree near a house affect the home?
So there's two things about that property. One, that was a redevelopment of sugarcane fields. So that's why there were no trees there. It was originally a sugarcane field, which meant it was a repetitive flood area. So that structure was also built above the base flood elevation and that area did flood and will forever have flooding. So it did not experience that. And as part of that, the electricals and major appliances were above that base flood. So there's that. So that was very unique because that is Louisiana, and if you don't know, it's similar to Florida in that it's technically an entire floodplain. So flood is one of their largest risks every day. The other thing, if you want to speak specifically to just trees, is that some insurance companies, yes, are starting to sort of focus, not technically based on sound data, that all trees need to be away from a house. The science does not support that, especially from a sustainable from energy. There are hurricane resistant trees. There are trees that can get through significant wind events repetitively. Actually, if you look to the University of Florida's forestry, they have, and if Graham can remember, we will go find this and get it over to Annie so she can share out. They have great research on wind resistant trees, but I will just name that magnolias, palms, and live oaks do spectacularly well in high winds and get through catastrophic hurricanes and do well. And of course, provide shade. So that is an energy saving factor. Now, Everyone, there's always people at one end or the other, and not necessarily always in the middle. So there will be people that swear to you that if you have a grove of pine trees or water oaks or any kind of shallow root, that if you have a whole wall of them, they will knock down the hurricane winds. And I will promise you that they will also knock down everything within reach of the structure, because they will come down because they have shallow roots. So it is very important to understand the species that is being planted and its resilience to wind. But there is a lot of research around that. So I hope that answered your question. I did ramble a little bit there.
No, I understand it pretty well. Thank you so much.
Well, we really appreciate that engagement. So thank you, everybody. If no further, our windows are always open. You can email us, you can call us over at Miami Homes for All, if not directly to IBHS or to Smart Home America. But thank you so much for this strong participation and engagement. And again, thanks to Smart Home America and IBHS. And wishing everybody a great day. Stay tuned.
Thank you.